This is the work of change, and this is the work of changing teaching and learning specifically. So you can kind of check off the boxes as we go through each of the 5. So the first level on this spectrum of success is just developing awareness. Do not downplay the importance of this. I love the quote from Tony Wagner from Harvard, that language is culture and vice versa. So language actually becomes culture. You've got to use the terms over and over and over. And to our board member in the audience today, as soon as my board started using the terms of the profile of the graduate, I knew, okay, we're ready for step 2. But use that language over and over, communicate it, put in all of your, besides the walls of your school, in your newsletters to parents, constantly reference the profile of the graduate. Use that language everywhere until people get sick of it. Now, I'm giving you 5 steps. In a few slides, I'm going to tell you, it takes about 4 years to get to step 5. So this is important work right here. Don't downplay it. People have to know what your profile stands for.
And I think and maybe we have a lot of people in the audience that already have their portrait. For those who don't yet have one and you're just starting to think about how to come across the competencies that you want to include, I cannot state enough how important it is to include the community. Because if you build it yourself and then you present it to them, then you have to build buy-in second. But if you actually include them in the process up front, then you have the buy-in to begin with. And some of the latter changes that you're going to have to make will come a little bit easier.
Now we're moving to building knowledge. So my suggestion is, and this helps teachers of all levels, that you have descriptors, clear descriptors for each of these skills of the portrait of the graduate. In that case, it really makes it come alive for teachers. What we did was we created, here's the descriptors for K through 3, here's descriptors for 4 through 5. What you don't want this to do, especially if you're using portrait of the graduate and not portrait of the learner, you don't want elementary teachers to feel you've slapped on these high school skills on their walls and it's like, okay, you have to measure this too. It has to be a K-12 initiative. There has to be a reason and an understanding of the terms for elementary teachers. The more you do to build and buy in young, because we all know kids aren't born in high school and these skills should be developed over and over. In fact, I have a quote here, I'll read it just in case you can't see it there, but I think it's in small print on your paper. Ellen Clabo, who a neuroscientist who wrote the book Second Nature. It's a great book. She talks about neural pathways that are formed when we teach English, reading, when we teach math, etc. She also says these same neural pathways are being formed when teachers talk about compassion, when students practice creativity. So these skills can be taught. It is our responsibility to teach these skills. Not everything is easy to teach and measure, but it doesn't mean we should not try.
Yeah. And I think the I can statements come back around here, and we're thinking about indicators, and you mentioned elementary teachers. We also want to think about elementary learners, so how can we create some statements that feel true to the learner that they can leverage in the classroom? I can argue without getting upset, or have an argument without getting upset, right? Being able to put that into language will unload the networks I'm communicating and collaborating. So thinking about your indicators from the educator lens is really important, but I'd always suggest having some learner-centered language that begins with I can, so they can actually see themselves in the evidence of learning and the competency.
Now, as we move forward, it's translating into practice. And this means that you've taken the skills and you've embedded them into curriculum. When you write curriculum, when you adjust curriculum, there are curriculum opportunities for practicing these skills. They have to be guaranteed opportunities so that every student has a chance to master the skills. We can't say, they're not good at critical thinking, but nobody's measuring critical thinking. They're not good at creativity, but who's measuring creativity except the art room or the music room. So these need to be embedded in curriculum, and there need to be guaranteed practices. Because ultimately, You want to prove to your stakeholders that our students have mastered these. And as a whole school, look at our senior class. They have mastered these and we can show you how. So creating curriculum opportunities that are guaranteed is now that third level of work. And you can see we're moving into more difficult process. The next one is red, because here's where everybody stops. This is like the depth of the profile of the graduate. How are we going to assess these skills in students? Now, not everything is easy to assess, but like I said, it doesn't mean that we should not try. I'm going to come back to assessing because I have several suggestions for you, but we're just going to go through it generically right now. And when I mean assess, we're talking about this requires participation of your teachers to adjust teaching and learning to measure these. Now, I said earlier, we all do that workaround where, okay, the portrait of the graduate, our attendance is improving, office referrals are down, there's a good culture, kids like each other, community's happy. But these were designed to change instruction. If your portrait of the graduate isn't changing teaching and learning, then you are missing a good opportunity. Not easy work. I made this one red because here's where it stops, but we're going to come back to it. So let's start talking about the assessments. I've been telling you for a while that we would talk about assessments because I think this is the important part. Now keep in mind, it doesn't have to be a sudden change to teaching and learning, but the practice of assessing these skills will help improve teaching along the way. Andy Hargreaves' best quote in education, measure what you value instead of what you can get information on, basically. So I'm going to go through each of these. This is like, as you go up, this is a nice place to start. Then we get a little bit more complex, and then we get even more complex at the end. So let's talk about where to begin. So this is, next one, please. Next one, this is how we enter the realm of assessment. So we adapt current assessments. So we kind of backdoor it in. So you tell your teachers, look, take your best, most creative assessments, and we're gonna backdoor our way into portfolio status and measuring these skills. So for example, in my district, these were our 5 scales, and we had them identified with little icons. And we used to tell the teachers, okay, twice a semester, we want you to develop an assessment that measures one of these. An existing assessment that measures one of these particular skills. Now you want to be careful that you don't assign and say, okay, social studies, you guys are in charge of global citizenship, and our teachers, you are in charge. Let this merge around the school. But what teachers can do is say, okay, to students, here's what this is due next Friday. Notice it's got the little globe at the top. You're going to put this in your portfolio. If it has a high enough score, if you feel that it's your quality work, you can put it in your portfolio to measure global citizen. You can also let students self-select work, but start populating the portfolio. So students can self-select work. You know, I did this project and I really think it shows my critical thinker. Or, you know, I was in charge of the fundraiser for the athletic teams, and you know, the work I got everybody to do, including the boosters and the parents, I'd like to write that up and put it in my portfolio as collaborative teammate. So this is kind of a way to, like I said, backdoor existing assessments into the portfolio. That's step one. Now you get teachers kind of looking at the work of students in a different way. Is this quality enough to go into your digital portfolio? Or if the student says, you know, I want to put this in my portfolio, get a sign off on a teacher that says, yeah, you can put that in your portfolio. I think that represents good work. That's the first level. The second level is more project-based learning opportunities. So it's teacher-based design with student options. So it's that kind of next level up. And when you get this presentation, you can click on here, a little worksheet for teachers to assign. This is filled out by the teacher. Identify the curriculum standards, open-ended problem, why is this a high interest? Then identify the nature of the project, etc. Just help the teachers think this out. Now, this doesn't mean that every assessment in their course shifts to this, but one semester. So I teach English 9. I'm going to devise something that meets this. As the teacher, we're going to let students know it's going to go in their portfolio. It's kind of an open-ended. I am still the designer as the teacher that measures these particular unit on poetry or something like that. But now it's a little bit more thought of as a way to measure a particular skill rather than just, hey, write a poem, or and then read it to the class. It's got a little bit more depth than that. The next thing is when we start getting to student self-selection. So, maybe it's a capstone, maybe it's Genius Hour, maybe it's something like that that's just a little bit more complicated, but we give the students, now we're talking student agency, you do not need to shift your entire school to this, but one semester now, we say to the students, okay, I am the social studies teacher of world history, you are going to design a project. You identify your own project, have a mentor if you need one. What's the product going to be? What problems are you exploring, etc. So we ask the students to critically think on, here's something that I think will measure the skills of the profile of the graduate. Here's what I'm really trying to do. And those forms, you're welcome to use them. They're links, live links in the slides. But I think what we have to understand is we need to be flexible enough with our teachers and our students because the skills are going to mean different things to different students. We want them to value this work. We want it to be individualized. We want it to be developmental. Maybe they revisit it their sophomore year or senior year, and it should be measured and repeated over time if it's a quality project or a quality commitment that we're asking them to look at. So allow for student agency, that individualized approach. Once again, your whole school doesn't need to move in this direction, but let's start changing teaching and learning, and that profile of the graduate is a great way to start making that shift. And then, of course, Richard Elmore, in the Northeast, we have a lot of respect for him, and he talks about the real accountability system is in the tasks that students are asked to do. Low-level task, low-level learning. Focus on content only, it's low-level learning. What is the task that we are asking students to do? That is the crux of quality education. And then ultimately, now we've got coherence in the district. K through 12, you say it's being measured. We can give reports of individual progress. You can do a state of the school's presentation. Here's whole school progress on meeting the profile of the graduate. Bring your business leaders in and say, here's how we're assessing, thanks to their support, here's how we're assessing the skills of the portrait of the graduate. Our students are mastering them. 90% of our seniors are graduating with these skills measured at the highest level, and that's important to us. If we're not assessing, if we're not talking about how students are performing, then we really haven't taken it off the walls as of yet. Great quote from McKinsey here too. By 2030, and our seniors right now are going to look for employment in the year 2030. They require higher level cognitive skills, collaboration, problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity. Sounds like everybody's portrait of the graduate. How are we ensuring that our graduates have mastered these skills? Once again, not using the skills to say, okay, we promote them and attendance is good. How are we promoting them so we can measure that, yes, we guaranteed experiences, and here's how our students are doing.